Good afternoon. Why don't we begin by your telling us about the Virginia Beach Public Schools in a nutshell? Aaron, would you like to take this?
Sure. Thanks, Doug. And good afternoon to you. So this is a wonderful and thriving school district here in Virginia Beach. We are a school district that serves 67,000 students. We're on the southeast coast of Virginia. We're bordered by the Atlantic Ocean to our east and the Chesapeake Bay to our north. And so we are really blessed to be in a wonderful location. A lot of times people think of Virginia Beach as kind of a resort town, but the fact is we're the largest city in Virginia, and we serve a really interesting and diverse group of students. We are serving one of the largest military connected populations of students in the country with about 19,000 military connected students here because of our proximity to Norfolk Naval Station and the fact that we have 3 military installations inside of our city proper. So a really interesting mix of young people. We have 86 schools and centers and an incredible array of programs that we offer K through 12 to include academy programs at most of our high schools and just a range of opportunities for learning and excelling and all of the things that you would come to expect in a terrific school district. And certainly we're very proud of the work that we do here in Virginia Beach.
You know, if I recall correctly, you and I, Aaron, did a podcast with a representative from the station, Naval Station.
That's exactly
about
right.
A STEM program, if I recall.
Yeah, we sure did. So we're really proud of the partnership with our military community. And the podcast you and I did, you're talking about, was with the CO of the Naval Station here, Oceana Naval Air Station, which is the master jet base for the East Coast. So we have a lot of F-18s flying overhead on a daily basis. We sort of joke that you can tell who the locals are and the tourists are, because when the F-18s fly over, the tourists are the ones who are looking up. And we have on an annual basis, we had to do it virtually this past year, but on an annual basis, we have created what we call the world's largest outdoor STEM lab. We send 5,000 of our 5th grade students every year to the Naval Air Station Air Show with the Blue Angels and all of the other amazing parts of their air show. And we go over the day before the official show begins, and the entire tarmac is converted into an outdoor STEM lab for our kids to go over and really, apply their learning, what they're going to be doing for the year in 5th grade on the tarmac, and really learn about careers in STEM. So really an exciting partnership there, and we've got those kinds of partnerships thriving all across our city.
Well, thank you. Carolyn, would you like to add anything?
Well, I come here with a few hats, a proud mother of 2 Virginia Beach City Public Schools graduates. We entered the school system from out of state when my children were upper elementary and middle school, and just as Dr. Spence mentioned, clearly one of the upsides of a division this size is the choice we can offer. And there might be public schools in the country that can match what we offer in terms of choice, but I would be hard pressed to come up with any that exceed that. And my children were the direct beneficiaries of that. And as young 30-somethings now, they just continue to thrive. And so I know for many of me and my colleagues, it's just their own children's positive experiences with Virginia Beach City Public Schools. And in some cases, in all honesty too, certain challenges along the way they may have encountered that they feel they can be a spokesperson for. I think that's what has most definitely motivated many of us to seek office and to continue to serve and move this division forward.
Now, you've been using a board committee structure in recent years, and we're going to home in on a particular committee in a few minutes. But what led you originally to adopt standing committees? What's the backstory on that, Carolyn?
Well, I'm just going to, I mean, the well-designed committee structure we have has been in place for quite some time. So I can't speak to, you know, how it evolved decades ago, but certainly I can speak to see how much it has evolved in just the 6 years I've served on the school board suggests to me, you know, it's been a constant evolution, keeping up with the times, so to speak, and the needs of a growing division. And so for us, we have, you know, many of these correspond with general governing streams, and others by their nature are more focused. But much of there's no question, much of our important school board work is accomplished at the committee level. And part of it is the sheer size of our division and all the complexities associated with an organization the size of ours, just make these delegated, you know, assignments that much more critical. We have 8 standing committees presently, and I can just quickly list them if there's any you want a little more background on, but going back to the more long-standing committees, the long-standing standing committees, we have internal audit, which is somewhat unique among divisions, maybe more common among those our size. We have legislative, we have a building utilization committee, a capital improvement program / modernization committee, and that's actually a joint committee with City Council to keep them abreast of our building needs. A policy review committee we affectionately refer to as PRC, and that was developed just in 2015 after Dr. Spence came on board. His insight with previous divisions he had served of the need and saw how effective, you know, our division could be with such a committee. And then we have the 2 new committees that really were based on your model, the governance committee, which we'll be speaking more to shortly, and we wound up with a planning and performance monitoring committee. So a little modification of your model. So and then finally there's a retirement savings plan oversight committee, which kind of speaks for itself. So those are our 8 standing committees.
Now I'm assuming, since the majority have existed for quite some time, that the committees are working well for you. They're doing their job?
I believe so, and I think we've put a lot of mechanisms in place in just the past year, and partly thanks to the governance committee that could address some of these matters to streamline things. We have both a bylaw and now a committee procedures document to streamline and make consistent among all 8 committees, the structure, the membership, the expectations. And related to that, our communications department worked with us to add a new link to our division website, a school board committee link. And there it's available for the public as well, a description of every committee, the schedule for the meeting schedule of the committees in this period of COVID, even Zoom links to committee meetings. And so obviously, when I say that I do believe they've been effective, it's for many reasons. I'll say first and foremost, the staff support, and that speaks to, you know, ultimately our superintendent here, Dr. Spence, but every committee has at least a staff liaison, some have 2, but their commitment to the committees is just exceptional. And you know, from your literature has also, I think, shared how that's such a needed component to make this work.
Oh, absolutely. Committees are not self-running, self-managing, take strong support.
And that relationship that each committee chair has with their liaison. So obviously it provides wonderful leadership opportunities for the board members. Again, I feel my years of service as the policy review chair helped prepare me for this greater role of school board chair, in addition to other past experiences that predate my time on school board. But that, I think that's significant. And the role of the chairs we do reference in the documents I mentioned. And finally, and you make a very convincing case in your book and books, and I'm the first to jump on this bandwagon, this meaningful creative engagement that the committees offer does lead to board member. I mean, the goal is board member ownership, right, and satisfaction. And that they feel they're part of the process on the front end, input into a new initiative or program rather than just being an audience at the end for a staff presentation.
So it's working. Aaron, what would you like to add before we go on?
Yeah, well, no, I think it is. It's sort of interesting in the state. There are actually not that many school divisions. And I'll note, because I know your listeners might hear school division, and in Virginia, we call them school divisions. They're school districts in most states. And there really aren't that many based on, I think, some model policy at the state level where standing committees are actually a thing. And so Virginia Beach is a bit unique in Virginia, although certainly not across the country, to have the number of standing committees that we have. And when I came in to the division to work as superintendent, I had to get acquainted with them pretty quickly. And they do work. I think they meet the needs of the division, as as Carolyn described, that we've got certain things that are really important. We have discipline committees where the board members really help us work through those student issues. And then we've got these other committees that really help us address some of the key and pressing needs that staff needs input on. So, yeah, and I think to the point, my experience has been for most of those committees, there's a great deal of board member satisfaction in the work.
Good. Now, Carolyn, let's home in on a particular committee, governance, which is one of, if I understand, one of your newer ones, right? The governance committee.
Yes, sir.
Well, tell us about the committee in a nutshell. Its membership, its role, its functions. Just paint a picture of that committee for us.
All right, happy to do so. So you're well aware, as the school board chair, I have the honor of also chairing this committee, and that aligns with your model. And so we also have the respective chairs of internal audit, policy review, and planning and performance monitoring. And we chose those three committees. The rationale at the time was they're the committees that meet the most frequently, the ones that are on a monthly schedule. Now we did modify your model a bit here, where we added an additional chair appointment, whether you want to call it at large, or we didn't really come up with a name for it, but the rationale was to offer the committee chair, or the school board chair, I should say, the flexibility to add any needed balance to the committee that might be lacking. Examples could include years of service, expertise, certain leanings, so that was well received, that recommendation. And so we are a committee of 5. Now, with a school board of 11, I think it's probably a little more than what your model would recommend. But again, you're the first, I think, to understand about modifications to suit the needs. And for the size of our division and even our school board, this seems right now to be a good size to work with. As far as the role, again, using your model, generally speaking, it comes down to 2 things, right? Coordinating and managing the school board's work, and then managing the relationship between the school board and the superintendent. So, the list of functions, the job description that is very closely modeled after our description is very closely modeled after yours. I can mention some of them, but they really do all fall under one of these two realms. And some of the examples that you're familiar with, but I can repeat for the listening viewers, board superintendent communication, an effective process for evaluating the superintendent and overseeing that process, an effective process for board self-evaluation. And then other examples, we can include a new school board protocols manual, retreat planning, effective communication of the school board committee work to the collective board. Time, place, and manner of school board meetings became very critical and sort of an inherited role for this committee, but it turned out to be a very critical body in the face of the pandemic. And the committee inception was it was January of 2020, so just 2 months prior to the inception. And so we became so the questions that immediately arose and then continued to evolve over the next 12 months, format of meetings, Zoom versus in person, and the details surrounding that. And then what do you do about the speakers and Zooming those in? And then when we did start to return in person, what social mitigation factors would be in place in the school board chambers? And so then how might that limit who else could attend in person in terms of the public? And the decisions, because the guidance continued to evolve, it seemed like at least almost every committee meeting, that was part of what we were addressing with recommendations to share with the full board. And then maybe two other add-ons were it's kind of an evolving challenge for an evolving development nationwide, but complaints that tend to pop up now, whether it's a constituent or a community resident submitting a complaint about a board member, or in some cases colleagues, themselves. There's been no place for these situations to land, because they weren't historically, they didn't really erupt historically. So we're still working through that. We're trying to, and every situation is so unique, and that's what makes it a challenge to try to come up with any procedures. But that's something we're working on.
But you're saying the landing place is the governance.
That's the intent, but just for really by default.
Well, it sounds like it fits, though, generally.
And I think, and that was even acknowledged, I think, in the original. That might have been something that was added from the get-go, included in the original job description. And the only other thing I'll add is we did have, in the meantime, one amendment to the bylaw job description, and that had to do with governance committee authority. And that arose as an issue, and I think it was a healthy discussion to have. And in our zest to come up with decisions or recommendations, we realized in some cases maybe we should have been turning to the school board when we weren't, for a further discussion or affirmation, for lack of a better word. So again, I think that was healthy engagement, and it just wound up being a slight adjustment to some of the bylaw language, that certain things would be subject to review of the full school board, and so everybody in the end was satisfied with that.
Great. Now let's hear from you, Aaron, from the superintendent's perspective. What's your experience with this committee, with governance?
Well, it's been really good. As you heard Carolyn say earlier, staff liaisons sort of work with all the different committees. I am the staff liaison along with our school board counsel to this committee. And, I'll give you an interesting example. It's really a good conversation to have with the board. First of all, it's been great during the pandemic, for example. I think in a lot of instances, the board was turning to the superintendent and saying, well, how do you want to handle this? How do you want to do meetings? What's your plan? And it was really good to be able to say, well, this is really a school board decision. Let's talk about it in governance. let's keep you engaged in this, because I think in a lot of cases, superintendents were put in untenable positions of making those decisions without the affirmative, dialogue with their boards. So it provided a great structure for that as an example. And it's been really healthy. Some of the other things that have gotten tackled critically, by the way, the superintendent evaluation process. I mean, we know how important that is. And that's been a key focus of the governance committee since it came into being, was to get that right and to revisit the practice and to revisit the procedure of the evaluation, but also the instrument itself. And they kind of broke off into a subcommittee to work on the instrument, and then another group kind of focused on the process, and then brought all that back together. And I think we landed in some really good places that have strengthened how we handle the process. And the feedback, I think Mrs. Rye or Carolyn can tell you, is that people really like the process we've arrived at. It's much more efficient than it was before. So
Yeah.
From my side, it's been really good to be able to engage with board leadership and like have a lot of clarity around some key questions.
And in a very real sense, this is your committee.
Yeah, I mean, but this is
this is the committee you interact with.
That's right.
Probably most
Certainly.
often.
Certainly keep an eye on the other committees. All of it's important. All the work is important. But in terms of maintaining the superintendent and board relationship, which is absolutely critical to the success of the division, this is a really important committee. We sit in the room and we hammer out issues, and my voice is heard, but also I hear the voice of our board leadership.
Now, governance is a recent addition to the structure, relatively recent. What kinds of questions, concerns did you need to address when you were considering setting up this committee? And how did you respond to get buy-in from everyone?
So Doug, I think the biggest question right out of the front edge of this was, what's the need? I mean, there's this sense of, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And we already have a committee structure and it works fine for us. But there had been a number of our board members who had been at an SBA, had listened to some of your work. Obviously, I had been engaged with you on this book, and really was thinking to myself, like, here's a way to really bring in two different ways that I was looking at it, additional engagement. So certainly governance, and then one of the other committees that Carolyn mentioned a minute ago, which ended up being what we call a planning and performance monitoring committee, but a committee that would engage in strategic planning and budget conversations. I felt those were really important. Those were kind of the two areas for me that our standing committees didn't address. And a lot of that, I think when Carolyn said, rather than being an audience at the end of some decisions, a lot of that felt like we needed to get engagement on the front end. And budget's a great example of that, where, I and my team would develop our budget. We would certainly ask the board for its priorities along the way as a collective group, but there wasn't a kind of sounding board for what we were developing before we went and presented it for the first time to the board. And then at that point, you've got about a month of public hearings before the board has to make a decision. And so we wanted an opportunity to really engage in a deeper way. And I think similarly with governance, rather than trying to have, big conversations about things like board self-evaluation or my evaluation, a way to engage with the leadership core of the board to really nail that down before it became kind of an audience discussion. So I saw the need, and I think the members who had seen some of your presentations saw the need, but the key was kind of answering the question of what's the purpose? Why do we need this for the full body? And really the way we tackled that, the board allowed me to put that on a retreat back in 2019, and was able to go in there and give a long presentation and conversation with the board and just answer those questions. What about the need? What would it accomplish? What would the job description actually, some of the questions you're asking, like what's the job description of it, and what would the function of it be, and what can those committees do and what can't they do, and just I think build clarity. And so, you know, we made it an intentional decision to do that in a retreat, to not rush the process, but to really spend as much time as we needed to get all the questions answered. And ultimately, I wasn't recommending it. I was saying, here is something that I think the board could consider to strengthen its governance roles, and left it in their hands to take that. So I will say a key partnership was with board leadership to make sure we had champions in board leadership who wanted this. If board leadership, if the chair and vice chair had said, we don't need this, then that would have been a non-starter. And I think you have to have that first, right? So, but I think there was some agreement between me and frankly, also, I will say this on the staff side, I had to make sure my staff was comfortable with this conversation.
Absolutely.
Because if you're going to create a committee that focuses on the budget and budget development and strategic planning, the folks who do that work on a day-to-day basis need to understand you can't just do it over in your office anymore. You're going to have to come to these committee meetings and talk about it. And so having some good staff conversation to prep for that was really important as well.
So the governance committees fulfilling your expectations pretty well. It's functioning at a fairly high level. What did you do to make sure it got off on the right foot? Once the decision was made, yeah, we're going to have a governance committee, let's do it. What did you do to make sure that the committee got off to a good start?
Right. So it's a perfect continuation of Dr. Spence's response. So I assumed both roles simultaneously, and I think this is something for other districts to just be mindful of if they're considering this, that by designating the school board chair as the governance committee chair, whoever becomes the school board chair automatically assumes these two new roles. So that's a challenge. Now, for me, I'll say the biggest challenge was the time challenge, because you are assuming the dual role, right? And so on top of it being a brand new committee, but I do thrive on developing something new, which is because I feel I did have the background with the policy review committee. So a lot of it was, so I just wanted to start with that. It was bringing the committee together and prioritizing the goals. So, you know, we had longstanding goals that previous leadership just never had the time to address because they were longer term projects, right? And you're chair and vice chair of a school board of 11 in a division that serves 67,000 students. But with this committee now, and again, a new home for these deferred projects, a protocols manual, the superintendent evaluation instrument and process, the board self-eval, and coming up with, I developed like a 6-month work plan in consultation with the committee, which involved, because you weren't going to accomplish everything in 6 months, right? But so it's establishing the work plan, and then with every successive 6 months, we look back on the previous 6 months. Okay, did we accomplish everything we wanted to in those 6? What's still pending, so to speak? And then what new things do we think we can add to reasonably tackle in this next 6 months? It was also a matter of understanding that by having as members chairs of the other committees, these are very effective members in their own right? Their individual committees have seen fit to elect them as chair of their committee. So it's a lot of very effective leadership on this committee. And so delegating and choosing members, or having members step forward to take the lead on some of these projects so that they could do a lot of work behind the scenes, so that our meetings became that much more efficient. You know, 2 members would return and report back on their progress, or a draft to share, right, or of the manual, or a draft of a self-evaluation form, for example.
So I imagine, Carolyn, that you and Aaron spend a lot of time together. communication between the two of you must be pretty frequent, right?
With respect to the governance committee?
And the committees generally.
Or, I mean, certainly on the broader level, school board level, there is a balance, because we have our school board council, who is our second staff liaison to the governance committee. We're fortunate to have both. And so Mrs. Linetti is the member I work with in terms of the agenda planning for the committees. Now, certainly there's input at every meeting from Dr. Spence and the other members. And so that was, and I wouldn't call that a challenge initially. It was more just, but it has worked out splendidly, where she and I just developed this pattern or rhythm to developing the monthly agendas. So that's another thing I wanted to mention.
Is there anything, as you look ahead, is there anything you think needs to be improved in terms of the governance committee's operations? Anything that you're thinking about tweaking going forward?
Well, I mentioned what's already been tweaked previously, and I'll repeat again. I think communication to the full board remains front and center on my radar, and just remembering, and we've along the way got more effective with using email communication in between meetings. Like I said, getting back to that issue of communication to the full board and getting input from the full board, and continuing to seek from the board, you know, how can we be more effective for you? So I'll mention again some of the more recent challenges that all governing bodies are facing, and how can the governance committee help serve in that effort. And so I mentioned, like, how to deal with complaints. Also, Dr. Spence, what would you like to add?
Well, I think I think one of the purposes that the governance committee was established for was board self-evaluation. So I think one of the things that the work really needs to continue there. That's, I think, in the midst of the pandemic, and really the committee finding its feet and figuring out its authority, and really focused on getting a protocols manual in place, which was really important in terms of thinking about board communication and how board's members interact with the community and with each other. Probably one of the lingering to-do items is that self-evaluation, and really seeing that come to fruition, so that they can have some good conversation about, you know, how are they in terms of boardsmanship and governance. And so I'm looking forward to working with them on that process as we move forward.
Good.
Yes, we expect, Doug, a final draft on that next month, and and then the process, you know, would hopefully be at the retreat. So every instrument has a process associated with it, right? So and so that's really our next step, is to figure out the best way to facilitate the process for the self-evaluation. But I'm very pleased so far with the development of a tool. You know, I think we've had a few good committee discussions, so we're going to be in a good place there. Good. Yes, Dr. Spence is absolutely right. That is our present focus.
Well, it sounds like the governance committee is firmly established, or as they say, institutionalized. It's part of your governing architecture, and now functioning as you intended. Well, I want to thank you for taking the time. I know how busy both of you are, so thanks for taking the time to brief us on the committee structure generally, and specifically on the governance committee and how it's functioning. Any closing words either of you would like to share before we?
I'm happy to jump
Sure.
in. I just want to give credit to my two predecessors. Mrs. Beverly Anderson, when Dr. Spence mentioned, this goes back to the NSBA convention and conference in San Antonio, when she was, I think, the lone school board member to come back and report on your talk. And then soon after, a few years later, and I was one of those who wondered, because I didn't quite understand the concept, you know, why do we need this? Like, isn't that what we have a school board chair and vice chair for? I mean, I remember that conversation. And then at Dr. Spence's urging, when 5 of us with the Philadelphia conference, you know, more affordable for more people to go as far as transportation, and we attended your early bird session. And so that, you know, and came back and reported on that. And so another previous chair, Dan Edwards, I just think the past and present school board chairs in particular could see the potential of this committee, because we understood the time constraints of chairing a division this size, and why some of these really important projects we just weren't getting to.
Yeah.
You know, this is not our subject today, but from what you've said, it sounds like you've made a fairly strong commitment to what you might call continuing education for board members. You've mentioned a couple of NSBA conferences. Am I correct that this is a fairly high priority? And does that fall under the governance committee, this idea of overseeing
So
attendance?
there is a high commitment for this board. I will say that for them. Also required, quite frankly, in state code, that our school board members do participate in their own professional learning and development. But this board really attends to that at both the state and national level, and supports that through their budget process as well. So that certainly matters and is important. I don't know, Carolyn, I don't know if you have any insight, but whether or not, I don't believe the governance committee has really particularly taken that up, outside of the fact that she mentioned the governance committee has taken on the responsibility for retreat planning. And so the board does engage in an annual full retreat, and then semi-annual sort of half-day retreat. And they have taken up the mantle on that. So that matters. And I guess, you know, as a sort of parting thought for me, Doug, and it really kind of leans into what Carolyn said, it's really, really important that the leadership and that the superintendent see the purpose for this kind of structure. And I would say and encourage, particularly superintendents who might be listening to this, if you don't have this structure, it really does give voice to the board superintendent relationship and the opportunity to make difficult decisions together that do need to get made. And it creates efficiency in that process. So I certainly encourage people to think about how to improve the governance structure there.
Well, thank you so much, Carolyn and Aaron, for taking the time to tell us the experience you've had with standing committees, and particularly the governance committee. We'll have to come back, do a part 2 down the pike away, and see where we are at that point. But meanwhile, have a wonderful evening, and thanks again. Take care.
Thank you. You are most welcome.